Now we've seen how we have header rows and header columns. We can use them mostly for labeling. So you could label a column like that. Footers are a little bit different because they're usually used for calculations. So let's add a footer row here. You're not going to have one by default. So we're going to shrink the table a bit so we can fit it all on one screen there. And I'm going to go over to Table, and here I've got the number of header columns, rows, and footers. So let's add a footer row here at the bottom, and you see it made this a slightly different style with a little bit of a thicker border between it. Depending upon your style here, like for instance you can choose another style, you might see a more pronounced footer there. Now let's fill the row with numbers. Now you wouldn't put a regular number in the footer row because the footer row is reserved for a calculation. So we have basically filled the entire column with numbers because this really is the column from B2 to B8. B1 is a header row on that column, so a header cell, and we have a footer cell here at the bottom. Now a simple calculation that we could use that we've already learned is sum. So we can hit the equals key and put sum. So I'm going to hit a left parenthesis, or I could select the word sum here from the little list of suggestions. And it wants me to put a value in here. And like we learned before, you could do B2 to B8 and select a range. But we also can click on the letter B up here to say we want the entire column to be included in this sum. So I'll select that, and you can see how it includes that range, but instead of saying B2 to B8 or even B, we get the name that's in the header row there, the header cell. So sum of amount. I'll hit the checkbox, and there we go, we have the sum. Now I could do things like we did before, like I can insert a row here and add something to it. And you could see it continues to increase the number of cells that are included here, but it doesn't have to actually change the value in there. It's still for the entire column. And in fact, we learned before how at the end of a spreadsheet, if you just hit return, you get a new row. And indeed, if we go to the cell just before the footer, if I hit return, instead of going down to the footer column, it actually inserts a new row. So I can add a number there. So notice that by indicating we want the entire row, we are basically including all the cells but not the header cells and the footer cells, which is good because you don't want the sum to include itself in there, right? You don't want it to sum all those numbers plus the value of this. That would get complex and actually wouldn't really make sense. So that's how we do it for that. If we were to, say, add some numbers here and copy this, it would give us the sum of this. It would change it to be sum of, and since there's no name here for the column in the header cell, it's going to use just the letter C. It's the only way it has to refer to that. So we can see now if I add a row just by hitting return there, I could add one there and I could add one there, and you can see how it adds sums there. And I could do the same thing with all sorts of other things that take a whole range of cells. I could just say I want the column. So I could do sum, I could do average, and I could do other functions like that using a footer row at the bottom.